Hey everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sarah Lean and I'm going to be your host and be taking you through today's webinar. Now, we're going to be talking about GitHub Actions, but before we get to that, I have a bit of housekeeping to cover off with you. Now, firstly, this webinar will be recorded, so you don't have to record it yourself, and we will be sending you the recording in a few days, so look for that in your inbox in a few days' time. Also, at the end of this webinar, we'll have 10-15 minutes of Q&A time for you. So please do send us in your questions. We'll be monitoring a few places for those questions. So firstly, we'll be monitoring our Slack channel. So if you head over to octopus.com/Slack and have a look at the webinars channel, you can post your questions in there. Alternatively, use the Zoom Q&A part so that we can capture your questions and we'll get to them at the end. So I think that's all my housekeeping over and done with. Today, I want to introduce my guest, and I'm joined by Damian Brady. Hi, Damian. How are you doing?
Hi. Great. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Awesome to be working with you again.
I know.
For anybody that doesn't know you, and I don't think there should be many people, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Damian Brady. I currently work for GitHub in the developer advocacy team. Before GitHub, I've been there for probably about 7 or 8 months. Before GitHub, we worked together actually at Microsoft, in DevRel at Microsoft. And before that, I actually worked at Octopus Deploy. So I have a bit of a history there as well. But yeah, it's all DevRel in terms of DevOps and process and all that kind of stuff. So this is right up my alley.
Awesome. It's such a small world. Even though we are at the opposite end of the globe, we've crossed over and met each other and worked at different places in the same places together.
I know. Yeah, it is a small world. Yeah.
Definitely. So I mentioned today we're going to be talking about GitHub Actions. So what are GitHub Actions for anybody that's not really familiar with that, Damian?
Yeah, so GitHub Actions is the feature of GitHub that allows you to automate a lot of stuff, actually. But we generally think about it, or most people think about it, as like your CI/CD platform on GitHub. So automation for pull requests and commits and pushes and that kind of stuff to build your application and optionally deploy it and do all of that stuff. It can do a lot more. It can automate stuff based on comments on issues, pretty much any trigger internal and even some external. It can run some automation to do that work. But yeah, that's the product really, is the automation side.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I've been trying to do some cool automation stuff with people posting pull requests to some of my repos and using GitHub Actions to respond to them in case I don't get to them quick enough.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. So today what we're going to do is take the Octo Pet Shop demo and sample code that we have at Octopus, and we're going to be showing you how you can build that inside GitHub Actions, and then we're going to show you a bit of Octopus Deploy and how we can marry the two tools together with that demo. So I think, Damian, you're up first. So do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, definitely. So I cloned this project, or forked it, sorry, from your repo the other day. It's a .NET project. I'm sure you've seen it probably on webinars before with Octopus, but we're going to create an action. And yes, there's some I prepared earlier, but we're going to create a new one from scratch just to show you what that looks like. So what we're going to do here is we're going to build our .NET application, and then we're going to move on and do some other things like package it up. I'm going to show you how you might deploy it if you're using just GitHub Actions, but then we're going to focus on deploying it with with Octopus. So how to talk to Octopus and how to do that kind of work too. So let's create a new workflow. I just clicked on Actions in the repo. I'll say New Workflow. And terminology-wise as well, a workflow is a set of actions. So GitHub Actions is the product itself. A workflow consists of a whole bunch of stuff, including actions, which are individual tasks. So it can get a little bit confusing. So suggested for the repo, it's looked at it and said it could be .NET. I could configure it based on that. Instead, I'm just going to do a workflow myself because I've got everything in snippets. Nobody really wants to see me typing, so I'm just going to do these in snippets. And you can see straight away we get a kind of a rich editor right in the browser. All of the workflows, all of your GitHub Actions workflows will live in .github/workflows. And this means that the definition of how to build your project, as well as potentially how to deploy it, how to talk to Octopus, how to do all of those other things, lives alongside the code, which is really important for things like branching strategies and all of that kind of stuff too. So everything lives in GitHub workflows. We'll call it main. And you can see this new file, we have a CI. It will trigger on a push to the main branch and a pull request to the main branch. There's also a workflow dispatch, which is a manual trigger. And then there's a list of jobs. We've got a build job running on Ubuntu. It's going to check out our code, in this case, run a hello world and do that kind of stuff. I don't want any of this. I'm just going to start from scratch. And so I've got the name of my build, which I'm going to call it build and create release, because that's what we'll ultimately do. Just so it doesn't keep triggering itself, I'm going to make it only a workflow dispatch, which is the name for a manual trigger. I'm going to set some environment variables, which are useful for .NET stuff. Set up one job. I'm going to run this on Windows, not because you can't compile .NET on Linux, but because the example that I got from this pet shop does use Windows. So to avoid issues, I'm just going to do the same thing. And now we've got our collection of steps. So this first one, which is almost always the one you'll use, is this checkout. You can also, over here, have a look at what actions there are. And there's well over 10,000 actions in that marketplace. So well over 10,000 actions you can use. If I search for checkout, you'll see there's a verified by GitHub checkout one. So if I was to click on that, you can see some documentation on how you'd use it. So really handy to do that kind of stuff. So I've got that item. I want to do a .NET build test and then a publish. So there are two main ways that you can run actions or steps. One is by using an action itself. So that's kind of a packaged up way of running a bunch of tasks. So if you're familiar with Octopus, I think those are called tasks. In Actions, GitHub Actions, they're called steps. So you can run one of those actions, or you can run on the command line. And so run is basically just going to run this on whatever command line for the OS or for the agent you're running on. In this case, it's Windows. So I'm going to do .NET restore, .NET build with a configuration, no restore, and .NET test. The publish is a .NET publish, and I'm being a bit more explicit here. I'm saying I just want the web project, and I'm going to set this configuration. This is how we do variables in GitHub Actions with the $, and then two curly braces. And you can see that environment variable up here, build configuration, build platform. So we're going to do that, and then we are going to tell it where to put that output. And that's important because that's the thing we want to deploy later on. And we're using some built-in variables as well, like the GitHub Workspace, which is a folder where you're actually working at the moment. And that's really just so that you know where it is later. It's worth mentioning as well that in this editor, in the browser, you get the control space in Windows especially. You get autocomplete, you get some nice stuff like that. But it helps you along a little bit. So here we go. We've got our build. I'm just going to delete that. We've got our .NET publish, and this is going to trigger on a workflow dispatch. So I'm just going to commit that now, just the basic one. We'll leave a terrible message, create main YAML, and then we'll see that that YAML file now exists in that folder, GitHub Workflows. If I go to Actions, you can see that on the list, build and create release. And I can run that workflow over here on any of the branches, and it will kick that off. So this is a really simple one, and this is just building my application. This is a great way to start to make sure that your software can actually compile and your tests pass and things like that. But I want to do a little bit more with this. So we want to use that package that we built, and we want to deploy it, but ultimately we want to send it to Octopus. To do this, rather than cloning it locally, I'm going to use a relatively new feature. One of the coolest things that exists in GitHub, I think, at the moment is I'm going to press dot. So I'm in the browser here. I'm going to press dot, or just the full stop, or the period, whatever you call it in your neck of the woods. So I'm going to hit dot, and then that's going to open up the web editor. And if this looks familiar, it's because it is literally VS Code. So it's VS Code running in the browser. I haven't got this locally. This is a remote. I'm editing directly on GitHub, but I still get, a decent experience here. In fact, I get basically the experience I'm used to if I was running it locally. So enough of that. Let's just look at what we want to do. We can see here that we've got one job to do a build. I'm going to use a different job to hypothetically deploy. You can pass information between these jobs, and each job will run on an agent that gets spun up kind of on demand and torn down at the end. So I'm using this agent here, or this job here, to build my application into a package that I'm ultimately going to deploy. And then I want another job to deploy it. And there's a few reasons you might want to do that. I'm not going to go into too much detail about why you do that. But what you want to do if you want to pass artifacts between them is use the artifact upload, or upload artifact action. Passing in some variables like the name of the artifact, what I actually want to package, and you'll notice this is the same location as the output from our .NET Publish. So that's what we want to package up. And then that artifact gets sent back up to GitHub so we can use it later on. In my next job, so we're at the jobs level of YAML, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about YAML later. In the jobs part of that, I'm going to add another job, which is my deploy to test job. Again, I'm going to run it on Windows, although I could easily run this one on Linux, and it would just pull down that artifact with that first step that I've got, the download artifact step. I'm going to pull down the one called Octopus Shop, the one that I uploaded, and I'm going to put it in a different location. This is a fresh agent on a fresh machine. And then I might use the Azure Web App Deploy to deploy to test. You can see I'm using some secrets here. So these secrets, I think we'll talk about secrets a little bit later, but they're basically ways of storing secret variables, things that you don't want in your repository specifically. In this case, it's the Azure Web App Publishing profile. Now I'm going to do one more thing. You'll see as well that this needs the Octopus Shop build. So these two are dependent, or this one is dependent on the build. I'm going to do one more thing and say, this is environment test. So what that will do is it will say this job, when it runs, is running for that test environment. And there's some more detail you can put in that environment if you want to, but I'm just going to do the basic stuff at the moment. So again, let's just commit this, and you'll see really similar to just running VS Code locally. So let's just do, oh, actually, before I do that, I don't want to actually deploy it to Azure, so let's just delete that. That'll take too long. So let's deploy. And I'll kick this off just to show you what it looks like, but then we're going to change things and we're going to move on while that's running. I committed that because I'm working directly on GitHub. I'm not submitting a pull request, which I probably should do. Then it's just going to commit that directly to the repository. I'm going to jump to that repository, and you can see there's my new file with my changes. And if I go to Actions, I can kick that one off again. You'll see that previous one succeeded. So we'll run this one. And I just want to show you this process, I guess, because this is a way of controlling, the different stages and different environments that you might want to deploy to, or even just different phases of your build process. So if you want to have breaks in between them. So this will do my build, and then it will deploy to my test environment. I'm going to show you what I have set up for that environment too, just quickly while that's running. If I go to settings for the repository and environments, you can see I've got this test environment with a protection rule on it. This is the way we kind of control progression from one environment to the next. I have a required reviewer, which is basically saying I need to review this before it will go to that next environment. So whenever anybody deploys to that test environment, or a workflow runs in that test environment, it will ask me to review it before it does that. All right, so while that's kicking off, it'll stop at the end of this process and request that I approve it. While it's doing that, let's change this so that we're not using Actions to do the deployment anymore. We want to use Octopus. Now, the good thing is we probably don't need to worry about this second job. All we need to do is package up this artifact, this website, and push that to Octopus, and then let Octopus manage all of the deployments and the releases and things like that. So let's just delete all of this. We don't need to upload that artifact. We could. There's no harm in doing that. It means that we'll have it at the end if we really want to. But we don't need to. So let's add some more tasks or some more steps. Sorry. So let's, first of all, to work with Octopus, if we're going to use the CLI, and we've got two choices, we can use command line. And in that case, we will install that Octopus CLI using the install Octopus CLI action. So this is actually an action that installs the tools that we need to run the CLI. And then I'm going to do a pack. And this, if you're familiar with the Octopus CLI, is just octo pack. And then we're giving it the ID, the format, and then we're giving it some versions. In this case, we're using a built-in variable, which is the run number. And we're telling it where that lives, and then the output as well. So we're going to pack, we're going to push, and that's doing the same thing, octo push, but it's pushing the package that we just packed to Octopus. And then I want to do one more thing. I want to do a release, or tell Octopus, hey, here's a new release. I don't have to do this. I could let Octopus control that, but I kind of like doing this. Now I'm doing this one a different way. Here I use just the command line. I just ran that command. But here I'm going to use that create release action. So this uses another bunch of secrets. So my Octopus API key, my server URL, and my Octopus space. I'm giving it versions and all sorts of stuff like that as well. So that one will make a change. Instead of making this workflow dispatch, I'm going to actually make this trigger when it's a push to, let me just make sure I'm getting this one right. I don't want to get it wrong. Branches, you know what? The best way to do this. GitHub box. You'll be surprised how often I actually go here, even though I should know better. So events that trigger workflows. Let's have a look at push, and then we can go push branches main. There you go. That's what I want. Push branches main. So when I push to that main branch, which is what I'm actually doing now, it will trigger this release. So is it new workflow Octopus? All right, let's make that change. And again, over here, let's just before we have a look at that change, let's have a look at whether this has gotten further. It's still running .NET test. All right. So let's see, we can see this new workflow with Octopus has fired off based on that main branch. So this will go through that process. It will run through all of those steps to install the CLI, any dependencies, package that project and push to Octopus and create a release. And then after that, it's kind of up to Octopus what happens with that process. It's kind of nice how you can see the logs flow past regardless of where they belong to or where they come from. So there we go. We've kind of gone through a few things. I would like to show you the process of approvals. Let's just see if that's finished. But if not, there we go. So here we go. It's waiting for me to approve. So if we do have these two phases that are dependent and one of them's on an environment, I can review that. So it looks good. And then squirrel, great. Approve and deploy. This is our ship at squirrel. And then it will kick on and it will do that next step. So that's how we control those. While this one's running, we'll see some stuff happen ultimately in Octopus Deploy, but it might be a good time to switch over to you again, Sarah, to talk about how what happens now, I guess. We've built, we've packaged, and we've pushed this to Octopus and told Octopus, here's the new release, and have a look at what happens from there.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Damian. Let me share my screen. So here we are inside the Octopus portal, and Damian and I have been working on this, so there's already a lot of things that have been built and pre-built ahead of time. If we look inside our library, inside Octopus, we can see those packages. Now, we have 5 packages for full disclosure. I have my bicep files all packaged up so that I can deploy my infrastructure to Azure using Octopus Deploy. But you can see the bottom 4 ones are the ones that Damian has been packaging up inside GitHub Actions and then pushed into this environment for us to utilize. And you can see we've got the various different versions. And I think if we dive into one of them, we can see we've got a bunch of versions where Damian and I have been working on this in the background. So that's what Damian has been working on, and then we can see that actually now inside Octopus as well. If we go into our project area, we can see inside this Octo Pet Shop process. So let me show you the deployment process that we have actually set up. We've got 5 stages here, and we've kept it fairly simple for this example. The first step is health checking that we have actually the infrastructure available to do this deployment. Now, this is an optional step, but I like to add it in because it just makes sure that before I actually release my infrastructure, my deployment targets are healthy and available, and I'm not trying to deploy an application halfway through and discovering that something isn't there. The second step actually takes the database, so the backend for this Octo Pet Shop application, and deploys it to our database. Now, what we're doing there in that step is we're actually using a jump box or a bastion box to deploy from and to our database server. So we're not actually deploying directly to our database server. We're using that jump box. Now, the next 3 steps are about our web app and how we deploy to that, because this Octo Pet Shop, as I'm sure you've seen in previous demos, has 3 web apps that make it what it is. So these 3 steps, if we have a look inside them, target each different role or target deployment that we have, because we have a different package for each part of that component. Now we can see we're using a worker pool that we have with all the tools that we need to be able to deploy this to. We're then deploying to that deployment target. So in this case, it's the Octo Pet Shop product service one. We're then calling that package, so that package that Damian built for us in GitHub Actions, and we're referencing that here and telling this step to use that package when we are actually carrying out this. And then last but not least, we have appsettings.json file that helps us configure some of our variables that we have so that we can see what version we're running when we actually view the application and the website, and whether we're running in test or production. So there's lots of different things happening there. But again, keeping it fairly simple. What I want to do though in this process is actually add a manual intervention step for our production environment. Again, just to add that human element so that if we accidentally deploy something, we can, control it as well, much like what Damian did in his example as well. So we search for that manual intervention step and click add. We'll give it a name, so production approval, because we only want this to run on our production environment. So we'll ask a question or tell the person that's going to approve this what they need to think about. So we'll say, we'll put in an indicator. In this case, it's just Damian and I working in this environment, so we'll keep it straightforward. You would obviously, in a real live environment, pick a subsection of your team to maybe approve production environments. In this case, again, because we're in a pretty simple demo environment, I'm going to say everyone that has access to this project can do that. But again, please don't do that in an actual real live environment. I want to put this for our production environment. So we'll say we only want this step to run inside our production environment, and then we'll click save. Now, as you can see, Octopus has put that step at the very bottom, so that's not great for us because we don't want to have to do the approval after everything's been deployed. So if we click on reorder step, we can put the production approval after the health check or before it. After the health check is not a problem because, again, that health check is just seeing if the infrastructure is available. So it's a good step to have in. So we reorder it. and we'll click Save. So that's the deployment process that we're using to build those packages that Damian showed us. If we go into releases, we can see those releases that Damian has pushed and created from his GitHub environment, and they're there for us if we wanted to automate that. Obviously, we still have the button inside Octopus where we could create a release manually if we wanted to, but these are the ones that have been automatically triggered from GitHub. So if we just have a look at that, we see these releases. We've only deployed one of them to test. Again, we can push that button and deploy that new version to Octopus as well if we wanted, or out to our environment. So that hopefully gives you some context in terms of what Damian's done and what it actually looks like inside Octopus. Now, let's see if Damian's version has actually ran. Has your last step actually completed, Damian, at all?
Yes, it just did. I actually had a clash with version numbers, so I had to quickly check those. But yes, it did. So this pushed, it created a release. So it pushed versions 1.7.3 or something like that, 1.7.4 of the package, the web package. And then it created a release. And you can see I added a couple of things that it didn't need. But it created a release 1.2.3 containing those packages, which is really handy. Like the logs for this action are really good. You can see exactly what it's been doing. So yeah, 1.2.3 is the newest one that's there.
Awesome. And just to keep us all honest, let's actually see that inside Octopus. So if we go over to our library, and yeah, we've got 1.7.4, which is what I think you said, Damian.
Yes, version 1.7.4. Sorry, front end 1.7.4. Yes, that's right.
So we have that. So we could go into, say, back into our projects and release that. So I think that release is 1.2.3. Would that be right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yes.
So the release itself is 1.2.3, but the package version for the web is, yeah.
Awesome. So we'll kick that off. So if I just hit that deploy button, I can manually trigger that, or I could schedule that, but we'll let that deploy in the background. But hopefully that just shows you the process of being able to actually deploy or use things in GitHub Actions and then deploy into Octopus.
Yeah, very cool.
Awesome. So, Damian, I have a few questions for you because there were some things that you showed us and I just want to deep dive into them, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, of course.
So you talked about the marketplace inside GitHub Actions. Could you explain a bit more about that? Is that free? How do people contribute through that? Is that something that GitHub have made, or how does that all work?
Yeah, so the marketplace is, and I believe there's actually an Octopus marketplace that's quite similar. It's a pretty much free marketplace. Actually, it's a completely free marketplace of actions that other people have written. The good thing about the marketplace as well is all of those actions actually exist in repositories that are public. So you can see what those repositories or what those actions are going to do by directly looking at the code. If you're going to write your own action, or if you ever want to write your own action, that's a great way of doing it. Find something that looks really similar and fork it. So do it yourself. But if you wanted to find it on GitHub itself, right at the top, you can go to the Marketplace tab. There's a Marketplace button right here, which will take you here. You can search for apps and actions. I'm ignoring apps at the moment, but those are another way of integrating with other platforms. But if I look for Octopus, for example, you can see there are 8 of them. Several of them, 4 of them are made by Octopus Deploy, who is a verified creator. So I know that we know that that creator, the person who created this action, is somebody that we are aware of, that we know of. So this create release that I just used, I can click into that. It gives me the details here, how many stars, who the contributors are. But this link over here on the right will take me to the repository, so I can see exactly what's in that action, like all of the code that's actually running when that action runs. It's just a repository. So yeah, there's well over 10,000 actions at the moment. Let's see if we can count them. There you go, 11,766 actions right now as we record this. That'll go up pretty quickly. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you can do with those actions that are available in the marketplace for free. You don't pay for any of these.
Is it fairly easy to contribute to that? Is there if I wanted to make my own action and then contribute to it, is there a big process there in terms of people have to contribute?
Yeah, I mean, you can actually freely contribute. It's quite easy to create your own action, and whether you want to put it in the marketplace or not, you can actually refer to other repositories that you have and use actions from those. If you have a look at the bits that were in this, or the way we reference those actions, so if we have a look at that main, this is Octopus Deploy Create Release Action 1.1, the 1.1.1, sorry. That is the repository. So if you have another repository that you want to make available as an action, that's all you need to do. You obviously need to put the right metadata in and the right kind of detail in there. But that repository means that pretty much anyone, if I just jump back here and paste that in, pretty much anyone can create one of these actions. There's a lot of documentation around it, so you can see exactly how to put them together. Or again, best place to go is to an action that you like and have a look at what they did. So yeah, relatively easy to put them together if you want to as well.
Awesome. Now, the other question I had was around the format of those GitHub Actions. They're written in YAML, which is, I think, equally loved and equally hated in the IT industry.
Yes, very polarizing. Yeah.
What would your advice be for people who are looking to start to create YAML files? Is there any advice you wish you had when you first started to figure out the format, or any tips, Damian?
I think as much as the core developer in me doesn't like the idea, cut and paste development is perfectly valid for writing YAML. YAML is a bit tricky, especially when it comes to indentation and things like that. So grabbing what somebody else has done, like looking at a repository that does a bunch of stuff and starting there, or even using the default action. So if you create a new action or a new workflow, and having a look at one that may be laid out really well and have the right stuff in it, but isn't doing necessarily the things you want, it's a good starting point. So I think rather than trying to write everything from scratch, start from a workflow that somebody else has written, or one of the templates when you create a new workflow, and work off that. There's no shame in copying and pasting stuff to get this working. The other thing I would say is if you're editing the actions in GitHub itself, like in the browser itself, you get some really nice editing tools. So you get the autocomplete and so on. Sorry, I'm just jumping around on the screen while I'm speaking to you. If you edit those actions directly in the browser, it gives you that nice UI of autocomplete and things like that if you're creating those actions in there as well. So I think if I've done this correctly, actually maybe I don't have changes. Sorry, I don't have access to that repository. I'm just going to really quickly jump to the one that I do. And if I make a change to here, you can see I kind of get that nice UI. So it's relatively safe to do it here. And then when you actually commit, you can commit with a pull request if you want to do that safely as well. And you get autocomplete and things like that. So probably not there because that's not a useful spot, but the tooling can definitely help you with YAML as well. So a few options. It's hard to write from scratch, so don't write from scratch is the kind of message.
I think one of the things that I actually have found that we made here at Octopus is actually a workflow generator. So what you can do, one of my colleagues made this and it's pretty awesome, Damian. So you can actually get your GitHub URL with all your code and your project in it, submit it here, whether it's a private or a public repository, and hit go. And then what it actually does is try to generate that kind of GitHub Actions workflow for you. So here it's generated it all for us. Now it looks slightly different. This is the same code that you just demoed for us. And it does look slightly differently, but it has a lot of things in there that you could, again, like you're saying, copy and paste so you don't have to start from scratch. Or if you're a bit confused by how that step works, or how do you don't quite understand the documentation, you've got an example there that you can copy and paste or try to manipulate and change. So yeah, there's different ways of doing this, but as you say, I wouldn't start to write these from scratch myself.
Yep. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. That's very cool. I'll have to try that, see what it generates.
Awesome. So I think that's all the questions I have. So let's jump over into some of the webinar attendee questions, Damian. So let me grab them out for you.
Sure.
Now, you talked briefly about secrets and how you store them inside GitHub. And I think someone's asking about how do you make that GitHub connection to Octopus, and you mentioned secrets. So could you take us through that a little bit, please?
Yeah, definitely. So I mentioned secrets in terms of ways to store information that you don't want in your repository. So obviously, if you're talking to Octopus, you need credentials, you need the URL, the Octopus server, and things like that. You probably don't want them in a configuration file in your repository, especially the API keys and things like that. So secrets is the right place to store that information. Secrets are also, you have the ability to scope them to an extent. So you can have repository secrets that are part of the entire repository. So you can use them in any of the actions. There's organization secrets. So you can kind of inherit secrets from your organization. So that might be server names or credentials for other services that your entire organization needs. But then there's also secrets for environments. So you might have an Azure publishing profile that is different for production and staging. You can also have code spaces secrets. So when you create a code space, which I haven't really talked about, but it's kind of the next step beyond that, pressing the dot for the web editor. When you create a code space, which is a cloud-based development machine, you can have secrets included in environment variables whenever you start up a code space. So that might be your specific API keys to services that you use while you're doing software development, or things like that. So there's a few different areas that you can put these secrets in, but they're all write only. So once you create one, you can only remove it or override it. You can't read back what that secret was. And I believe that's the same with variables in Octopus if you create them as secret variables, if I'm correct.
Yeah. So there are some that you can kind of hide and encrypt inside Octopus as well, so you can't see them again, which is handy and also not so handy when you forgot what it is and you're trying to troubleshoot some things.
Yeah. The number of times that I've recreated an API key because I forgot what it was.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I also want to talk about testing, because I don't think we really talked about that in terms of what you did inside GitHub Actions. Could you do testing on your software, security testing? Is that something that can be built into that kind of build process on that end, Damian?
Yeah, definitely. So the process or the workflow that you create can kind of include anything you want. So in our example, I think we just did a .NET test, and so that will run any tests that we have in our .NET application. And that's one level of testing. That's kind of your unit testing and things like that. You mentioned security testing as well. So there's a whole suite of tools in GitHub under the heading of kind of GitHub Advanced Security. And that gives you a bunch of stuff that you can do with your repository. And some of those things work inside Actions or work with Actions. So I might actually just show you the screen if I can. So this is the security tab from our Octopet application. You can see that I can set up security policies, security advisories, and so on. But there's one which is quite cool with this code scanning alerts and Dependabot. So code scanning will basically create a code QL analysis. So this is kind of a security static analysis for a bunch of different languages. I can set up that workflow, and this is exactly the same as if I'd written this myself. It's just an action workflow or a GitHub Actions workflow that runs on a schedule, as well as any push to my main branch or a pull request, and it will analyze my project. and give me this security analysis of, of the software that I'm creating. So this is, they're not free. There is pricing details. These are generally enterprise features as well. But these CodeQL analyses can give you more information about whether you've introduced a vulnerability or have a dependency that has a vulnerability, or you're using poor practices for filtering strings and all that kind of stuff that you really want to know about. And that operates as a actions workflow. Dependabot is kind of similar. It gives you a bunch of analysis to tell you whether you're using a dependency, like an NPM package or something that has a dependency or has a security vulnerability. We'll give you alerts. We'll do code scanning and all sorts of other stuff. And some of this runs as workflows as well. So not just the ones built in for GitHub, but there's ones from third parties as well, if you want to run those. And yeah, they operate using GitHub Actions. So whether you're using these or your own kind of testing frameworks, that's definitely something you can add to that pipeline.
Awesome. I think I have Dependabot set up in some of my repositories, which is great. But then also I keep getting emails from it saying I need to look at something. So yeah.
Yeah, so, I think half of the projects I go to, Dependabot's got a little alert saying you need to upgrade these dependencies. Yeah.
I guess that's a key factor. Security is only good as if you keep it up to date, whereas I'm sure a few of my repos need actions.
Which one of the things that Dependabot can do actually is, in some cases, it can submit a pull request with the change to upgrade the dependency. So I've seen it almost became a meme that you have a bot, which is Dependabot, telling you about a security vulnerability and also submitting a pull request. And then you have actions or workflows that run when somebody submits a pull request to ask for approval, check some details, check that everything's filled in correctly, and then potentially even automatically merge that into your main. So you've got a bot finding the problem, fixing the problem, and then merging it. A little bit creepy, but it can be done.
That sounds good. Maybe I need to automate it all so I don't have to do anything at all.
Yeah, that's the dream. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned that some of those security features may involve a charge. Is GitHub Actions itself free, or where's the price point around any of that? Because I imagine there's going to be some kind of line where it suddenly becomes a chargeable feature, Damian.
Yeah, so the GitHub Actions, we've tried to make it as free as possible. A lot of these tools where we're basically giving you use of a machine or compute for free come with their own risks, obviously. So at some point, yes, it does start charging. GitHub Actions for the free account, there's some included storage and some build minutes and things like that. In general, public projects, we're pretty happy to give you build minutes and things like that. And then we give you more storage space and more minutes for for the greater plans. So the GitHub Pro, organizations, team, enterprise, and things like that. So yeah, it's not going to be free beyond a certain point, or it'll be free up to a certain point, and then charging for it beyond that. It's pretty easy to find the billing details. You can pretty much just do a search with GitHub Actions billing. Oops. It doesn't matter if you spell it wrong. There you go. So I got billing for GitHub Actions, and it tells you included storage and minutes and things like that. There are some intricacies around what type of agents you use too. So if you're building on a Mac agent, then or a Mac runner, then that's running on a Mac machine, which has additional costs and things like that. So yeah, just be aware of some of these things. So yeah, definitely worth looking at for the action stuff.
Awesome. I think the last question we have is more around the getting started again. Like, if you're not familiar with GitHub or GitHub Actions, what would your advice be to people to getting started and using this and building it?
Yeah, as always, docs is a great place to start. The GitHub docs are really well put together. There's a lot of information in there. The great thing about GitHub in general, beyond the docs and beyond videos and things like that, we have a YouTube channel. We do a bunch of those things. We've just started TikTok as well. So if you're younger than me, maybe you'll find us there. Beyond those, though, the great thing about GitHub in general is that a lot of stuff is in the open. GitHub is kind of, and always has been, the home for open source. So finding other projects that have done things that you want to do can be really handy as well. If you find a project, a public project that is similar to yours that uses actions in a cool way, you can see what those actions look like, and you can copy what people have done. You can fork your own projects and work things out that way. So that's a great way of getting started as well, is to see what the community is doing and copy, contribute as well, and like learn from others, I guess, is the message there. A lot of stuff is in the open, so it's really easy to learn that.
Awesome. I know I said that was the last question, but I do have one more point to discuss. And it's probably more of a discussion point, to be honest, Damian, because I think most people will be know, and I think you said this yourself, that GitHub Actions is a CI/CD tool. So you could, in effect, do all of the building and then deployment, as you kind of showed us, within GitHub Actions. So you don't necessarily need to split that process up and use two tools. What's your thoughts around splitting that up, those, having two different tools that do your CI/CD pipeline?
I definitely like splitting the build and the release. So there's a few ways to do it. If you're using the one tool, having that in separate jobs that use separate environments, I think is really important. Building it once and then deploying it many times, which is was always the catch cry when we were at Octopus: build once, deploy many.
Yep.
I've been guilty of this once or twice before, but rebuilding to deploy to each environment is generally a pretty bad idea, because you build your application, deploy it to a test environment, everything looks great. If you build it again to deploy to a production environment, you're not testing, you haven't tested that code. That's a brand new bit of artifact that you're deploying. So regardless of whether you use a different tool to do the deployment and the build, I think you really need to separate those processes, whether that's just separation by job or whether that's separation by entire tool set. I think that's kind of the key. I would also say as well that if you're having success with a particular tool, you don't need to think about moving. I actually get asked a lot, oh, hey, we can do deployments with GitHub. Should we move away from Octopus? And the answer is, if Octopus is working for you, why would you move? It's a great tool if it's doing the job. Fantastic.
I think, I've spoke to a lot of customers in my previous job at Microsoft about migrating to the cloud and moving your environment. And one of the advice I always said, if you've got a tool or a skill set in-house that people have, and how you've spent a lot of money maybe investing in that, whether that be PowerShell training or buying a tool like Octopus, keep those wins and don't change everything, right? If you're moving to the cloud from maybe an on-prem infrastructure, the last thing you want to do is have 100% change, right? Because you've been involved in these projects as well, Damian. They don't last, because there's always something. So I think that's a key thing as well. If you've invested in something, if your staff are happy with it, if it's doing the job, then continue using that tool or process or technology. I think there's definitely a lot there. So thank you so much, Damian. I really do appreciate your time, and it's been awesome working with you again. Hopefully we can do it again. Maybe we can do another basketball game somewhere in America when we bump into each other like last time.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, when we can travel again one day.
Yes, that would be awesome. So thank you so much, and we really do appreciate your time. Thank you to our attendees. Again, thank you for tuning in. What we're going to do is put together resources for you to take this demo and use that GitHub Action workflow that Damian built, and we share that. So this should be on screen for you now to grab and have a go yourself as well. Also, if you have any more questions around GitHub Actions and Octopus, please do reach out to our team. They can answer your questions and they can help you with your individual queries. And lastly, not but least, we are hiring at Octopus, so please do reach out to our careers website and have a look, because we'd love to join you and have you on our team as well. So thank you so much for attending this webinar, and we'll hopefully catch you in another one.